Hello, this is Philip Nichols, and on this channel, we look at science and culture through a biblical creationist worldview. And in today's video, we will be discussing the evidence for Adam and Eve, to put it simply, with Standing for Truth, who has discussed and debated this topic way too many times, I'm sure he would say. And the style of this interview I expect to be more of a casual discussion type. But nevertheless, I am here to ask the very first question. Is there evidence out there that could give us more confidence that all men came from two men, or one man, one woman, about 6,000 to 10,000 years ago?
Great question, Philip. And I want to thank you first for inviting me onto your channel for, I think, this very important interview on this very important topic. Before I answer that question, I want to let all my viewers and listeners know to go over to your channel, like, subscribe. Philip, you are putting out some great material. You're defending the faith. So God bless you for that.
I appreciate it.
No problem, brother. No problem. So thanks again for having me on your channel for this interview. Great question, and definitely one of my favorite topics. Like you said, I have had way too many debates and discussions on this question of ancestry. We at Standing for Truth have also made a ton of videos demonstrating a scientific Adam and Eve and independent origins. There are many of us. It's a team effort over on Standing for Truth, Philip. So I've also got a book out on the topic where I provide irrefutable evidence for the first couple, while also debunking all the best arguments against an Adam and Eve from the critics. The evidence for Adam and Eve, though, is so overwhelming. To be honest with you, it's even difficult to pick just one line of evidence. The best evidence, though, probably would be the fact that we have actually discovered the first couple in genetics. So what I mean by that is we have discovered both mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosome Adam. And there's no disputing the fact that there is one single Y chromosome ancestor. Literally every single Y chromosome on this planet, Philip, is nearly identical.
Okay, hold on.
Very little
Hold
variation.
Hold on. I don't want you to interrupt your thought, but I have a beginner geneticist question. What is the difference? Like you said, Y chromosome Adam and mitochondrial Eve. What's the difference between those two?
This would be a good question to answer as we further along in this question. So in genetics, Philip, we know that the man passes down the Y chromosome. So you got your Y chromosome from your father. Okay, and then the women, they pass down their mitochondrial DNA. So you and I both got our mitochondrial DNA from our mothers. These are what are called the uniparentally inherited DNA compartments. And that's why we can make some seriously good predictions using those DNA compartments. And when it comes to the Y chromosome, as I was saying earlier, we've got very little variation in the Y chromosome. The evidence suggests that we have one Y chromosomal ancestor who lived in the not so distant past. Now, here's the thing. Remember this, and I want the audience to pay close attention to this one, that if the Bible's account of human origins is true, right, then what does the Bible tell us? Well, the Bible is the history book of the universe, Philip. And it also gives us the account of our origins as humans. It says that God created two people, Adam and Eve. Okay, so if the account of human origins in Genesis is actually true, we should be able to look at the mitochondrial DNA, right, that is passed down from our mothers, and the Y chromosome, which is passed down from our fathers. We should be able to trace them back to two common ancestors, two individuals, as the Bible tells us would have been the case. Now, here's what I find fascinating, is the fact that this data that we have did not have to be true if evolution were true. But this did have to be true if the Bible was true. Because like I said, the Bible predicted this. The Bible tells us that God created two humans, Adam and Eve, with not even a hint of relationship with any other form of life,
Yeah.
especially the apes
Yeah,
and
and
the chimpanzee.
I don't mean to prick at evolutionists too much, but well, actually, I do, I guess. But no, yeah, they don't play around when they talk about predictions. They're like, they always bully Christians like, you guys don't have any predictions, no predictions, no predictions here, no predictions there, and we have them all. But we actually do
That's
have the
right.
predictions, and basically every field you look at, they're just discovering things that we knew so long ago, like the Grand Canyon. Now they're just starting to think that it was formed rapidly, for the most part. And
That's right.
creationists have been so far ahead in all of these things, and they're still trying to say they've got these predictions.
They are the ones, the evolutionary community, Philip, like you said, brilliant point. They're the ones that set this standard. The gold standard of science is to make testable and falsifiable predictions. And yet it is now the creationists that are the ones making testable and falsifiable predictions. The evolutionists are backed up into a corner. They're on the defense. We're on the offense. It's an amazing time to be a young earth creationist. And here's the thing. When it comes to the data that we have confirming the Bible's account of human origins, okay, when it comes to the evolutionists, they did not predict any of this data. They actually had to retrofit the data. They had to invent population bottlenecks, for example, when in fact the Bible predicted this. This had to be true because according to our model, Philip, and I think this is going to make sense to your audience, the most recent common ancestor according to the biblical creation model of ancestry would actually be Noah. And what's fascinating is we now know that there are only about 4,500 years worth of mutations in the Y chromosome that's passed down on the male side. Let's talk about Eve, the mother of us all, okay? The mother of all living, as the Bible says. Well, the mitochondrial DNA actually turns out to be exactly what we would expect if the Genesis account of human origins were true. I want to say this again. The evolutionists did not predict this. And Philip, I'm glad that you pointed that out, because that is such an important point for your audience to take home tonight. There is every possible reason for the evolutionists to have discovered that this mitochondrial DNA ancestor was not so unique. Okay? If evolution was true, Philip, this mitochondrial DNA ancestor could have shared many lines with chimpanzees if we actually shared relationship with them, of course. They were shocked, Philip, shocked. When they sequenced the Y chromosome of the chimpanzee, they discovered that it was less than 70% dissimilar. And when you actually consider overall size differences in architecture, it's less than 35% similar. So oftentimes the evolutionists, Philip, they'll point to what's called the nested hierarchy, the fact that we share more with the chimpanzee and the great apes in terms of anatomy, morphology, genetics, for example.
And we would agree.
And that's exactly what we'd expect. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that, hey,
No.
we are going to share more with the chimpanzee than we would with a fish or a bacteria.
Yep.
Okay, so the point is homology, nested hierarchical patterns. That is expected on both sides. That's why I like to oftentimes point to the differentiating lines of evidence, right? The types of evidence that can show either creation to be true or evolution to be true. Not the types of evidence, like if I were to be arguing with an evolutionist and I were to say, well, you know, my position's correct, Philip, because the sky is blue. What in the world? That's not an argument, because the sky is blue. It could be explained by both creation or evolution, right? Just like homology, similarities in DNA can be explained by both models. So that's why you got to look to differentiating lines of evidence. One of them being, like we've been discussing, the Y chromosome data, mitochondrial DNA data. But I will point this out. I'm glad you brought it up. First off, mitochondrial trees, okay, they grow in branching like patterns. The reason why this is because of mutations. So to put it simply, what we can do, okay, we can reverse the clock back to the point where we would actually find Eve. We can even start with Eve herself, okay? So for example, Eve would have children, and then her children would have children, of course. Now, every time a child is born, there's always the chance of that child having what? Well, a mutation. Okay. So over time, due to these mutations, the family tree gains more and more branches. Now, all we have to do is back this process up to where we actually discover the woman of whom we have all descended from. Now, I know it sounds all quite technical, but to put it simply, we literally know Eve. We can trace back in our genetics, okay, which is the direct way of determining ancestry. We can trace back all mitochondrial DNA in the world to one single female ancestor. This did not have to be true. The Bible predicted it thousands of years ago. Off the ark, you'd have Noah, his wife, their 3 sons, and their 3 wives. What's fascinating about that is it turns out that there's 3 main mitochondrial DNA haplogroups in the world today, which means that is pretty striking confirmation.
Yeah, that's
go ahead.
That's amazing. Well, yeah, I just basically said what you said. That's about as clear of a prediction as you can possibly get.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It doesn't get any more clear than that. And evolutionists have to say that once again, this is all coincidence. I mean, like I said, it's an amazing time to be a young Earth creationist. Now, here's another thing that I want to mention that I think your viewers are going to enjoy. It comes down to mutation accumulation and genetic degeneration. Okay, I think you're familiar with this, Philip. Genetic degeneration also points us to our first couple, Adam and Eve. Now, here's the problem. Mutations, they're accumulating far too fast for selection to be able to filter out these mutations, okay?
Definitely.
Essentially, most mutations are actually invisible to selection. Selection can't see them. And the reason why is because they are only slightly bad. They're only slightly deleterious. With selection, natural selection can only see the worst. Okay, and it can only see the best. Once in a while, you'll get a rare beneficial mutation. Roughly, it's about 1 in a million. Okay, and large-scale evolution obviously needs lots of beneficial mutations. And when there is a beneficial mutation with a large enough impact, Philip, natural selection can see it and amplify it. But here's the thing, they're so rare, and those beneficial mutations are oftentimes reductive, that they can't counterbalance all of these essentially invisible mutations that I like to call nearly neutral, that are accumulating. To make it easy to understand, they're accumulating much like rust accumulates on a car. Okay, you can't always see each rust event, but over time, that car will rust out. Well, I was going to point, I can also think of it like spelling mistakes that occur in a book, right? A single spelling mistake in a book the size of an encyclopedia, you're not going to see it right away. And that single spelling mistake on its own, it's essentially inconsequential. But the buildup of them over time, that will degrade the book, ruin the message. And that's what's happening in our genetics.
That when you talk about beneficial mutations, you mentioned that they are possible. Creationists typically don't give even a beneficial mutation, but I actually am one of the people that do believe they are there, and I think most creationists would agree when it comes down to detail. But I feel like they're more in the category of beneficial adaptions, in my opinion, than mutations, because they're not getting more information. They might be changing like a different hair color or thicker fur, but they're not adding information. It's more like a beneficial adaptation, in my opinion. But that's like a minor thing. It wouldn't even matter if it was a beneficial mutation, because as you say, there are too many negative mutations.
Exactly right. The way I like to see it, the bigger issue, the key issue is about net gain versus net loss. So when the word beneficial mutation is used, it is beneficial mutations, even according to the evolutionists, they're context dependent, they're environmentally dependent. So for example, they're not really beneficial in the way, like you said, where they are making the creature better, or they are counterbalancing the damage due to these mutations that are accumulating. One example, Philip, is sickle cell anemia. Okay, so it's got an advantage, okay, in a way, but that advantage is due to a broken cell, broken protein. It's a loss of information.
Actually, yeah, I know someone personally. She had sickle cell anemia, and she lived in Nigeria, where malaria is everywhere, and nobody wants to get malaria. But I know for a fact that she would trade getting malaria for getting rid of her sickle cell anemia, because it is miserable. So yeah, it technically does help her in a way. Like, malaria sucks and it kills a lot of people, but sickle cell anemia is far, far, far worse. So yeah, it's not a good trade.
Yeah, it's not a good trade. So what you're looking at with sickle cell anemia, these people that actually have this mutation that evolutionists like to say is taking things forward, okay, the people with mutation that actually causes sickle cell anemia, they have a broken gene, which then makes a broken protein. Okay, so now people who have this broken gene and broken protein, the red blood cells, they are defective to the point where malaria cannot thrive in the person with this condition. Therefore, as a result, Philip, they're now more resistant to malaria. But this is still reductive. It's not taking things forward. And the sickness associated with this disease, sure, it results in a resistance to the malaria parasite, but it's still degrading. You know, it's not going to take your fish to fishermen. And this is the best they got, which is which I find to be rather funny. For your audience, let me use an analogy, because a lot of this stuff can be technical, okay? And evolutionists are constantly, you know, invoking these types of examples in a desperate attempt to demonstrate their, bacteria-like organism to biologist evolution. I like using this example because we've done this recently in our house, Philip. Let us pretend, okay, let's say you and your wife, you guys wanted to make the dining room in your homes, in your house, larger, and you decided to do that by knocking down the interior wall. Well, would you then say that you built the house by knocking down walls? Of course not.
Yep.
So evolutionists, they would look at this as, you know, some type of benefit. Sure, we can get some nice changes by knocking out genes or knocking out that wall. We got a bigger room by knocking out a pre-existing wall. But that's not how we built the house. It's not how we built the wall. It's all a downhill process.
Exactly.
Consistent with our model, which talks about the fall. Adam and Eve sinned, and mutations have entered. We can take the point of most mutation accumulation that we see today, okay? We can take this back to a point in time of least mutation accumulation, least genetic entropy. That would be a point of perfection, a point of creation, a point of Adam and Eve. So mutations take us back to the first couple. I mean, so many lines of evidence confirm a literal and scientific Adam and Eve.
The next question I have, which we kind of touched on, is how does this study impact evolution?
Okay, very good question. When it comes to genetic entropy and how all of this affects evolution, well, mutation accumulation, like we've talked about, clearly puts what on genomes? Well, it puts shelf lives on genomes. And remember, evolutionists claim mutations are what drives evolution. Natural selection and mutations have essentially, according to the evolutionists, taken a fish to fisherman, have taken particles to people, you know. Based on empirical science, though, this can't be true. Mutations, I like to say, Philip, they are destruction and not construction. They are not the creator, they are the destroyer. They break things down, not make things better. And as we were talking about earlier, with sickle cell anemia, even your best quote-unquote beneficial mutations are reductive. They're functionally compromising to organisms. Philip, we are born with roughly 100 new mutations that our parents did not have. We are consistently more mutant every generation. Based on what we now understand, Philip, about the functionality of the genome, okay, this just means the genome is a lot more functional than evolutionists have ever predicted. We actually have, and we can talk about it for hours. For sake of time, we won't, but we have preliminary evidence for genome-wide functionality. And here's what this means. This means that the evolutionists cannot claim that most of the genome is junk, making most of these mutations that accumulate neutral, because they'll say that those mutations hit the junk areas, areas.
The more we're discovering how useful the quote unquote junk DNA is, like, it's looking bad for the evolutionists in that department.
It's looking very bad. They've calculated that even if the genome was only 10% functional, that still makes evolution impossible, because that's still 10 of those 100 new mutations, 10 of them are deleterious, accumulating from generation to generation. Even 10% is too much for them, for evolution to be true. We still understand so little of I call it the DNA language. It would be like, I speak no Russian, okay, Philip? No Russian. Can't read it.
Me neither.
It would be like me taking a job over in Russia to be a proofreader for a book or something like that. And I'm looking through the book and I'm trying to figure out what's a spelling mistake, what's not. I don't know the language. I understand very little of it. That's what it's like in the DNA language. They understand so little about it. And
the last frontier
progresses, the more function they discover, the more multiple overlapping codes they've discovered in the genome.
Okay.
I mean, it's science fiction, I'm telling you.
Okay, I'm gonna kind of switch the subject, because I know we're talking about mutations and stuff. I loved our conversation there, but I was mostly asking about how the Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA studies affected evolution.
So when it comes to the mitochondrial DNA and the Y chromosome we were discussing earlier, I'm glad that you kind of brought us back on track with that. Now, here's the thing. The molecular clocks in these DNA compartments, they're very, very bad news for evolution. I'm going to tell you why, brother. So the mutation rate in these DNA compartments, the Y chromosome, the mitochondrial DNA, they're far too fast for evolution. This is why evolutionary scientists, and I've debated a number of PhDs on this is why they hate what's called the empirical method. We like empirical science, Philip. Or in other words, it is called the pedigree method, and I'll explain what that is. So as creationists, we like to compare mutation rates in the present, okay, today.
Yeah.
We do this by using parents to offspring. And this is exactly what's called the pedigree-based method. And what's fascinating, though, is the fact that when we actually compare mutation rates between, say, parents and children, the mutation rate is way faster than the phylogenetic rate. Now, the phylogenetic rate, for the audience, it's not the empirical rate, and this is what evolutionists look to, where they assume a few things. Okay, they assume ape time, they assume ape to man evolution, and they calibrate the dates with the fossil record. Okay, so I'm going to end it with this. Mutation rates, in a nutshell, mutation rates are fast. And there are only a few mutations in the mitochondrial DNA and the Y chromosome. What I mean is that there are only a few mutations that separate any human being. Philip, me, yourself, somebody over in Africa, there's only a few mutations that separate any of us from what's called the mitochondrial Eve DNA sequence, essentially Eve herself. But this means, what's the effect it has on evolution? Well, this means humans and apes are not related. They can't be related. This means evolution and universal common ancestry is false. It's not true. It can't be.
Yep. I totally agree with you. They really have to strain and grasp and chop up their theory to try and make it work with observable science, which evolutionists, every time I bring up observable science, I can just like see them squirm. Like they hate those words. But
they hate it. They hate it.
Yeah, right when you bring up observable science, they don't like that. But actually, I want to go into the next question. Do you have any predictions on future studies on this topic that you want to just throw out there, or if not, it's okay?
Great question, Philip. And it deserves a great answer. It deserves a detailed answer. So my short answer would be definitely. There are numerous predictions made by creationist scientists, Philip, based on the amazing genetic data and evidence that we've been discussing. I always say, and we touched on this earlier, The best way to answer this question of ancestry that we're discussing here today is by looking to genetics. It's our genes and traits that are inherited, sperm and egg, okay? Not a rock, not geography, not a fossil, right? A lot of these evolutionists, they want to hide out in the fossil record where they can hope, dream, and imagine. We, according to the Genesis account, we wouldn't say that God created Adam and Eve to reproduce by cloning. That wouldn't make any sense, okay? You know, God said, be fruitful and multiply, not be fruitful and clone yourself.
Yep.
So the biblical model of ancestry that we purport suggests that Adam and Eve were created with amazing genomes. They were front-loaded with pre-existing genetic diversity that is useful and will help create variation. And starting from that position, we have made numerous predictions on genome functionality. What's amazing, these are predictions that evolutionists themselves are not making. They can't make it because they need to assume most of the genome is junk, like we were talking. So I wanted to point out also that Matt, he's been an incredible blessing to the Standing for Truth ministry. We've actually been working together on all of this for about 2 years now. He contributes a lot to the content coming out at SFT. He's personally made predictions that trace de novo mutation rates back to just 2 people, and the numbers have been perfect. It's actually currently submitted for peer review, and I believe it's Creation Ministries. So to be honest with you, Philip, I could talk for hours and hours about creationist predictions. It is an amazing time to be a creationist, and there are so many predictions coming from creation scientists. So,
oh yeah, I think evolutionists make a sour mistake when they keep jamming in our ears that we have no predictions. The next question is one I've never heard asked before, and I'm kind of curious about your thoughts. And this tracking back down the Y chromosome and figuring out how long ago our ancestry goes. Is this study done all in animals? And if not, why or why not?
Very good question. Another good question. So once again, to put it simply, the answer is definitely. There's been actually a recent study that I've pulled out a number of times in debates that I've had. And the study, and I'll send it to you as well, it has shown that based on genetic diversity in what's called the CO1 gene of the mitochondria, it has indicated that over 90% of all animals came into existence at the same time. This is clear evidence for the global flood model, and this came out of a secular research paper. And they were shocked by it. You know, as always, they had to invoke what's called a selective sweep, a bottleneck, essentially wiping out all diversity. So here's, once again, evolutionists have never predicted any of this data. So now we're looking at animals, Philip, where the data suggests that over 90% of all animals originated at the same time. Then we've got the human-related data that take us right back to just 2 people, Adam and Eve. I mean, that is the biblical-based model right there. Evolution's never predicted any of this data. Also, we can just look at the number of species today on the planet, okay? And we can make predictions on the number of species, let's say within a family, okay? That we would expect if the flood bottleneck occurred just 4,500 years ago. I'll use one example. I'll make this quick. But we could essentially go through all kinds of animals. I've had full debates, discussions on this, but let's just look to birds. Let's take a tough one, okay? Because the evolutionists will accuse us of taking the easy way out. Let's go with one of the harder ones. Birds. There's about 10 to 12,000 bird species on the planet today. So, as biblical creationists, we would then predict roughly 2 to 3 new bird species per year since the flood. Now, what's amazing is this. We now have evidence for bird speciation events in real time today. We've seen it, indicating that there are far too bird species today if deep time evolution were true, okay? All the numbers line up with our model. Think about this, Philip. Evolutionists say birds, modern day birds, evolved from theropod-like dinosaurs millions and millions of years ago. Let's say 300 million years ago. Well, according to the numbers and the rates of speciation we see today, I mean, we're seeing new bird species today, okay? we should be easily seeing 500,000 bird species or more, not 10 to 12,000 bird species. If evolution were true, we should be seeing way more bird species. Why are there so few bird species? Even if we accounted for extinction events, okay, we incorporated extinction rates, there's still far too few bird species if deep time evolution was true. And we could go into bats, lizards, reptiles. We can go into cats, the felid family, you name it. All the numbers of species we see today line up with the biblical flood model of 4,500 years ago.
Well, I originally planned this to be like 15 minutes, but there's no way this is going to fit in 15 minutes. But
we definitely talked about a lot.
This is the last question, but a very important one. How do you want to impact people with your ministry?
Very good question. So the ministry name is Standing for Truth. So we want to promote truth. There's a lot of people that have been brought up essentially in a naturalistic worldview. Listen, when I was in college, I blindly believed evolution. You know, I never heard of any of this evidence. When I talk about this with my family, with my friends, they are amazed. They're mind boggled. They're like, I never heard about any of this. Like, this is true. This is what science is saying. It's like, yeah, science literally confirms creation, confirms Adam and Eve. So a lot of people don't know this evidence is out there, and they see a lot of your atheist bullies with their large YouTube channels or going on to some of these debate channels, you know. So it was my goal at first to get in there, utilize a lot of this data, debate these evolutionists. Because here's the thing, a lot of these evolutionists, they've never heard of this data. I can't tell. I've had about 70 formal debates. And I'm telling you, even I just had another debate a couple weeks ago. A month ago, I debated. His name was Dr. Ron Garrett. He's written against genetic entropy. And he was kind of left speechless at a lot of these lines of evidence. He kept saying, well, I got to look into this. I got to look into this, which is fine.
Yeah, it is.
Here's the thing. Even your most militant critics haven't heard of this. So, you know, it's been my goal I always say this. It's not about winning arguments, Philip. It's about winning souls.
Exactly.
So especially people in the chat. Maybe they're watching a debate and they're on the fence or they're agnostic on the issue, okay? And they see these lines of evidence. Hopefully it plants a seed.
Exactly.
For them to hear the gospel, be willing to hear and receive the gospel, and therefore accept the free gift of Jesus Christ, accept the free gift of salvation. So it ultimately comes down to the gospel and salvation. But a lot of people, they have a wall. They have blinders because they won't even listen to the gospel with an open mind. So when you remove those blinders, you remove that wall, now they are open to the gospel. And that's what happened to me. You know, when I first heard of this evidence, when I first became open to it, that is when I reached a point where I was willing to hear the gospel, receive the free gift.
Yeah, that's the end goal, I think, for basically every biblical creationist anyway. And an unseen part of this ministry that I like to make known, and I'm sure is important to you as well, is our fellow comrades, our fellow brothers in Christ, because I'm sure all of us have experienced times of doubting that is put on us through the world and through these attacks of evolution and other things as well. But when somebody needs evidence to give them that strength and that in their faith, I just got all these evolutionist sources, and that's all I had. And when I saw Kent Hovind talk about it, it gave me that extra boost of faith. And that's another side of the coin that is very important to me, and I'm sure it is to you as well.
Amen. Amen, brother. I could not have said it better myself.
I appreciate Standing for Truth. Hope you enjoyed the video. And until next time, I will see you guys.